Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She texted me at 2 a.m. like it was nothing. Busy now, I'll call after. No explanation. No apology. Just the kind of half-alive message people send when they forget the person on the other end can bleed. I stared at it for a second, feeling the glow of the screen slice through the dark. Then I wrote back, "Don't bother. Stay with him. My line is closed to you." I hit send, placed the phone face down, and waited for the silence to settle. It felt sharper than her words. 10 minutes later, I heard tires grinding against the gravel outside. Her shift always ended late, but never this fast. I looked out the window and saw her stumbling toward the door, still in her old navy jacket from the night shift, panic all over her face. Funny how people move when they think something is slipping beyond reach. She froze as soon as she stepped inside. The house lights were off. Even the soft glow from the TV was gone. No Disney Plus humming in the background like she usually needed to fall asleep. I sat at the table, calm, structured, in the same posture I used at work when I traced intrusions through a network without letting anyone see the spike in my pulse. She whispered something about late shipments, extra pallets, delays. Same script. Same tired breath. I didn't interrupt. I didn't question. I just watched her realize I wasn't reacting the way she expected. Her eyes jumped to the counter, where I'd placed the empty Chick-fil-A container I found in her car earlier that night. She always blamed Sam's Club runs for the extra hours, but this wasn't food from Sam's Club. It wasn't even from our side of town, and she knew I knew that. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't mention the shift overlap. I didn't need to. I could see the moment she understood I had stopped accepting the version of reality she'd been feeding me. Something in her face collapsed inward, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet implosion, the kind that can't be undone. I stood up without a word, took the keys to my Dodge Ram, and stepped past her. No raised voice, no questions, just a simple recalibration. She reached for my arm, but I could already feel the distance growing between us, clean, cold, and final. And as I walked out, the house behind me felt strangely silent, like it finally matched what had been happening for months. I drove for an hour that night without turning on the radio, letting the empty roads brace me in a silence cleaner than anything waiting back home. When I returned just before sunrise, she was on the couch, still in that old navy jacket, pretending she had drifted off while waiting. But her posture was too rigid, her eyes too alert. She had been listening for my steps. I walked past her without a word, and that was the first shift she truly felt. Not anger, not accusation, just the absence of the man she was used to leaning on. The next morning, I adjusted my routine without announcing it. My work in network security always revolved around patterns, and once a pattern breaks, it never goes back to what it was. I changed the alarm time, left the house earlier, and didn't do the usual check-in text she used to depend on. She hovered in the doorway, trying to gauge whether she still had access to the old version of me. I could see she didn't. It unsettled her more than any confrontation would have. Around noon, during a short break between audits, I noticed something that confirmed what my intuition already knew. Her posts on Facebook Marketplace lined up too neatly with the nights she claimed she was swamped with extra duties. Items listed from the same neighborhood where her coworker lived. Timestamps that matched the nights she insisted she was cleaning up after a chaotic shift. No need for messages or screenshots. The trail was there, quiet and consistent, like most betrayals that aren't born from passion but fatigue. When I got home that evening, she had made an effort. Dinner out on the table, the living room lit softly, and Disney Plus humming in the background like she thought nostalgia could pull me back into orbit. I stepped inside, surveyed the scene, and felt absolutely nothing. Not resentment, not tenderness, just a distance that had settled into place with the precision of a system reboot. She waited for me to sit, expecting the evening to bend the way it used to. I walked past her instead, heading to the back room where I'd already started changing passwords, routines, boundaries. The subtle kind of restructuring that didn't need to be spoken to be felt. She watched me disappear down the hallway, and I could sense the truth hitting her harder than any raised voice. She no longer knew the man standing in her house. By the third day, the distance between us had settled into something she could feel before she even entered a room. I watched her try to rebuild familiarity by repeating old routines, but every attempt only exposed how deeply the structure had changed. That morning, she lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, pretending to check her schedule while really waiting for me to look up. I didn't. I'd already shifted my focus to a new set of access logs at work, the kind that mirrored the quiet trails people leave in real life when they think no one is watching. Later that afternoon, while reviewing a client's compromised network, a familiar pattern emerged, not on their system, but in my own head. The timing of her extended shifts, the sudden need for late-night Sam's Club inventory checks, the nights she came home with that faint mix of warehouse dust and someone else's cologne buried under her Old Navy hoodie. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was the kind of slow bleed most relationships never catch until it floods everything. When I got home that evening, she was waiting again, this time in the living room with Disney Plus playing softly behind her. She wasn't watching it. She just needed the noise. She hovered in the doorway, hoping I'd break the silence first. I walked past her, heading toward the hallway where I'd already started removing her access to the parts of my routine she used to navigate like second nature. She followed me halfway, then stopped when she realized I wasn't slowing down. She tried opening the conversation by mentioning a coworker, the same one she claimed always covered her shifts. She didn't say his name, but the way she paused afterward told me everything. She wanted me to ask. She needed me to. I didn't give her that. Silence, when used with intent, is its own kind of clarity. Later that night, I stepped out to the truck and found another small detail that tightened the picture. A crumpled Chick-fil-A receipt wedged between the seats, timestamped during one of her mandatory overtime nights. Not a weapon, just confirmation. Quiet, simple, irrefutable. I put it in my pocket, not to confront her, but to remind myself of the truth she kept trying to blur. By the time I walked back inside, she looked at me like she finally understood the shift wasn't about anger. It was about access. She no longer had any. By the end of that week, the house felt like a split screen. She kept trying to rewind us to some softer version of our life, while I moved through each room with the precision of someone updating a system that could no longer be trusted. I wasn't punishing her. I wasn't even reacting to her. I was simply restructuring my world by removing the weak points one by one. She felt it before she could name it, and that unsettled her more than anything I could have said out loud. That Friday night, she came home earlier than usual, stepping into the kitchen like she expected to catch me in the wrong somehow. I was at the table, reviewing a client's intrusion logs, quiet and focused. She placed a bag on the counter a little too loudly, hoping I'd ask where she'd been. I recognized the logo instantly. Sam's Club, her usual shield. She let the bag sit there between us like an alibi, but I didn't even look at it. The silence stretched long enough for her to understand the message. Her explanations no longer had a place to land. When I got up to refill my water, she followed me, stopping just behind my shoulder. She was close enough to speak, but she didn't. She just hovered, searching for the version of me who used to turn toward her without thinking. I didn't turn. That small non-movement hit harder than any argument could. Later that night, while she sat curled on the couch with Disney Plus playing, more for comfort than entertainment, I stepped out to the truck. The cab still held the faint scent of the Chick-fil-A meal she grabbed after a long shift earlier that week, a detail that meant nothing on its own, but everything when added to the pattern. I sat there for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me, realizing how far I had already pulled away without raising my voice once. When I walked back inside, she straightened up, waiting for some signal that she still had access to me. I offered none. I simply moved past her, calm and unreachable. In that moment, I saw the truth settle in her eyes. She wasn't losing me because of what she did. She was losing me because I had already outgrown the version of myself that tolerated it. The shift happened quietly, the way most structural failures do. By the next week, I had stopped mirroring any of her emotional cues. She'd come home drained from her late shift, pause in the doorway like she was waiting for the familiar warmth to pull her back to center, and instead she found me absorbed in work, calm and unreachable. I wasn't performing distance. I wasn't trying to teach her a lesson. I'd simply rerouted the part of myself she used to access without knocking. Once that change was made, there was no going back. One night, just after midnight, I stepped out to the truck to grab a hard drive. When I opened the door, Something slipped from the passenger seat and hit the floor. A folded schedule printout from her store. I picked it up, expecting a normal rotation, but saw his name, Evan, lined up beside hers for 6 straight night shifts. Same hours, same breaks, same pattern that matched every lie she rapped in exhausted breath and overtime chaos. It wasn't incriminating on its own, but patterns don't lie. People do. I placed the paper on the dashboard and sat there for a long moment, watching my breath fog the windshield. I remembered how she once said the night shift felt safer because the routine made everyone closer. She said it casually, not realizing she'd mapped the exact environment where her guard would drop and someone else's presence would start to feel like gravity instead of coincidence. It wasn't romance. It was erosion. When I walked back inside, she was in the kitchen, wearing the same old navy hoodie she used as armor after long shifts. She looked up like she expected me to soften. Instead, I walked past her and started adjusting the access permissions on my home network, removing her devices from the secure profiles she used without thinking. Not a punishment, just a recalibration. A boundary she could feel even if she didn't understand the mechanics behind it. She hovered behind me, hoping to start a conversation she no longer had the clearance for. I didn't turn. I didn't acknowledge the tension she was trying to defuse. The silence wasn't cold, it was final. And in that silence, I watched a realization flicker across her face. She wasn't facing anger. She was facing a man she no longer knew how to reach. By the time the next week rolled in, the distance between us had stopped being a reaction and had become the new operating system of the house. She felt it in every room she walked into. I watched her try to rebuild normalcy the way someone tries to piece together a deleted file without realizing the original structure is gone. Her attempts weren't dramatic. They were small, nervous gestures, the kind people make when they sense they're losing ground they once assumed was theirs. That Tuesday evening, I came home earlier than usual. The house was lit, quiet, almost staged. She stood near the kitchen counter, arms folded, pretending she was just finishing up some task. But her eyes gave her away. They tracked my movements the way someone watches a door that's been locking itself more and more each day. On the table behind her sat a half-unpacked Sam's Club bag, positioned too carefully, like she hoped the sight of it would pull my mind back into the routine she depended on. I didn't acknowledge it. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because the signal no longer registered. The frequency had changed. She followed me into the living room, where Disney Plus played softly, the kind of ambient noise she leaned on whenever she didn't know how to start a conversation. She tried hovering beside the couch, waiting for me to look up, waiting for any sign I might bridge the silence. I stayed focused on reviewing a client's security audit on my laptop, the glow from the screen reflecting a calm she couldn't read anymore. It wasn't coldness, it was clarity. Later that night, when I stepped outside to the truck, I saw her through the window pacing the living room. Not frantic, just unsettled, the way someone moves when they feel the ground shifting under their feet but can't see the fault lines. I sat in the truck for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me, the same way I did before assessing any breach. Patterns don't lie, and the pattern now was simple. She wasn't fighting for us. She was fighting for access to the version of me she believed would always be available. When I went back inside, she stopped pacing. She waited for something, anything, but all I gave her was calm distance. And I watched the realization hit. She wasn't losing me to anger. She was losing me to evolution. By the time the month turned over, the silence between us had stopped feeling like tension and started feeling like architecture, something built, intentional, load-bearing. She moved around the house like she was waiting for alarms to go off, as if any small sound might signal the version of me she still hoped to reach. But that man wasn't here anymore. What remained was a steadier version, quieter, disciplined, clean in the way a system becomes after removing corrupted access. One night, just after she came home from her shift, I was in my office updating a series of network permissions for a client. The glow from my monitor lit the room, and I could feel her presence long before I heard her step inside the doorway. She stood there silently, hands tucked into the sleeves of her old navy hoodie, as if the fabric itself might shield her from what she was about to lose. She lingered behind me for a long moment, waiting for the familiar reflex, me turning, softening, giving her an opening. When it didn't come, she tried creating her own. She walked into the living room and turned on Disney Plus, letting the familiar startup sound echo through the house the way she used to do when she wanted to pull me out of concentration. Once, I would have joined her without thinking. Now, it barely registered. Later, when I stepped outside to clear my head, I noticed the faint smell inside the truck, a mix of cleaning solution and something else, a lingering sweetness from the Chick-fil-A meal she had eaten on her break. It wasn't the scent that hit me. It was the memory of how she used to text me during those breaks, small check-ins that once meant something. Now they were replaced by long gaps, shifts that stretched later than the schedule required, explanations wrapped in fatigue and habit instead of truth. When I walked back inside, she was waiting near the doorway, standing too straight, like someone bracing for impact. But I didn't give her impact. I gave her nothing. Just a calm, unreachable presence that she couldn't decode. And in that moment, I saw the quiet collapse in her posture, the realization that I wasn't withholding myself. I had simply moved beyond the version of me she still hoped to summon back. She confronted me on a Thursday night, though confrontation might be the wrong word. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was the quiet kind of unraveling, the kind that happens when someone finally realizes the window they've been tapping on no longer leads into the same room. I had just finished a system diagnostic for a client when I heard her footsteps in the hallway. Slow, hesitant, almost ceremonial. She stood in the doorway, still wearing her old navy jacket from the shift, the fabric carrying that familiar mix of warehouse air and fluorescent light fatigue. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at me, waiting for the reaction she was certain would come if she held eye contact long enough. When I didn't give it, she moved closer, her voice soft and deliberate as she tried to explain how the long nights had worn her down, how routines blurred, how the people you see at 3 a.m. sometimes feel closer than the ones you come home to. She didn't say his name, but the pause after someone from work was heavier than any confession. I listened without interrupting, the way I analyze a log of timestamps, observing patterns, not emotions. Her words circled the same points she'd been avoiding for weeks, but they didn't land the way she intended. They weren't revelations. They were confirmations. Everything she said aligned too neatly with the nights she listed furniture on Facebook Marketplace after her shift, the same nights she blamed on last-minute tasks or unexpected shipments. Patterns always tell the real story. When she realized I wasn't reacting, no raised voice, no accusation, her composure cracked just slightly. She stepped closer, mentioning how she put on Disney Plus earlier, hoping we could watch something together like before. She said it quietly, like a memory she didn't know how to access anymore. I could see her searching for the version of me who would respond to that gesture, the one who would drop everything to meet her halfway. But I wasn't meeting her halfway. I wasn't meeting her anywhere. I stood up, calm and steady, and walked past her toward the kitchen. Not to leave, not to punish, just to move. She turned to follow, but something in my posture stopped her cold. That was the moment she understood. This wasn't distance. This wasn't anger. This was me stepping out of the version of our life she no longer had the keys to. Her unraveling didn't happen in one moment. It happened in layers, each one slipping out from under her as she tried to pretend everything was still salvageable. By the time the weekend arrived, the house felt different. Not colder, just clearer, as if the air itself stopped carrying the weight of unspoken explanations. I moved through the rooms with the same composed precision I used at work, adjusting systems, updating routines, tightening boundaries she once crossed without thinking. She felt each shift like a door quietly locking behind her. That Saturday evening, she came home earlier than usual. She stepped through the front door slowly, scanning the house as if checking whether anything had changed again. It had. I'd reorganized the office, realigned the network access, and restructured the shared calendar in a way that no longer revolved around her night shifts. None of it was punitive. It was maintenance, removing vulnerabilities, restoring integrity. But to her, it felt like erasure. She placed a Sam's Club bag on the counter, the kind she used to justify staying late. I didn't look up from the notes on my laptop. She lingered there, hoping I'd give her something, even a question. When I didn't, her voice cracked for the first time in weeks, quiet, almost unintentional. She said she had been thinking a lot, thinking about the nights she stayed late, The breaks she shared with someone who understood the exhaustion of the 3 a.m. grind, the loneliness she tried to fill with routine instead of honesty. She didn't admit anything, but she didn't have to. The pauses between her words said everything. When she finished, she sat down on the couch, turned on Disney Plus the same way she did in the beginning, hoping the familiar sound could anchor us back to something. But even that had shifted. The noise no longer bridged the silence. It only highlighted how far apart we were. Later, when I stepped out to the truck, I saw her through the window, shoulders slumped, hands clasped tightly, staring at the TV without watching it. She wasn't breaking down. She was breaking open, the way people do when they realize the collapse is internal, not external. When I walked back inside, she looked up with eyes that finally understood the truth. Her world was falling apart, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to hold it together for her. The final shift didn't feel like a dramatic ending. It felt like a quiet recalibration, the moment a system finishes updating and restarts into something cleaner, sharper, and impossible to roll back. That Sunday morning, sunlight filled the kitchen in a way it hadn't in months. I was making coffee, moving with the same steady rhythm I used at work, when I heard her footsteps behind me, slow, uncertain, almost hollow. She stood there for a moment before speaking, as if she needed to confirm I was real and not just the distant outline she'd been chasing around the house. She said she hadn't slept, not because of work, not because of the night shifts, but because she kept replaying every moment she thought she was just tired, and every moment I pulled away without raising my voice. She tried to explain the loneliness of those late hours at the store, how routine turned into dependency, how dependency blurred into something she didn't intend but didn't stop. She didn't use his name. She didn't need to. The shadow of those nights was already in the room with us. I listened quietly, the way I scan a network for vulnerabilities, patient, objective, without letting the noise distort the signal. She reached for the counter, steadying herself, and said she wanted to rebuild what we had, that she could fix this. But the truth sat between us like a completed audit. What she missed wasn't the relationship. It was access to the version of me she believed would always be waiting. She stepped closer, mentioning how she put on Disney Plus the night before, hoping the familiar routine might draw me back. The way her voice softened told me she finally understood the real distance wasn't physical. It was structural. She hadn't lost a partner. She'd lost access to a man she once assumed would never change his patterns. I set my coffee down, turned to face her fully for the first time in weeks. No anger, no bitterness, just clarity. I told her, quietly, steadily, that I didn't disappear. I simply stopped showing up in places where respect had stopped showing up first. Her breath caught, a small, involuntary reaction, the kind that comes when truth finally lands without cushioning. I didn't walk out. I didn't slam a door. I just stepped past her, calm and composed, moving into the day as a version of myself she no longer controlled, no longer predicted, no longer accessed. And she understood, fully, finally, that this wasn't silence. It was closure. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.